You are about to witness one of the most important games in the history of chess. That is not hyperbole or exaggeration, it is a fact. In this game, Tigran Petrosian introduces an entire new concept into the game of chess, a concept so profound that to this very day it gets its own chapter in many middle game manuals. It is a brilliant idea, and you're going to witness it right now. This game was played at the Candidates Tournament in 1953. White was Samuel Reshevsky, one of the greatest American players in history. If it had not been for Bobby Fischer, he would have been the greatest player of that era. And of course, world champion, future world champion, Tigran Petrosian has the black pieces. Reshevsky begins with the move d4. Petrosian plays knight to f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and bishop to b4. We have the Nimzo Indian defense on the board. Black is playing to control the e4 square and possibly do some damage to White's queenside pawns, although albeit at the expense of a very nice dark squared bishop. Reshevsky just plays the main idea here, e3, preparing to later arrange his pieces to play e4 later on in the game. Castles, bishop to d3. The bishop helps control that e4 square. And Petrosian plays d5, getting his share of the center and also further controlling e4. Reshevsky just develops naturally, knight to f3. And here, perhaps motivated by the fact that Reshevsky's king is still in the middle of the board, Black plays c5, creating a great deal of tension and the possibility of open lines in the center. There are a lot of potential pawn exchanges in the middle of the board, as you can see. Reshevsky goes ahead and castles, and Black can take on c4. Black can take on d4 here, but Petrosian goes ahead and plays knight to c6, maintaining that tension in the central position. Now, Reshevsky plays a3, and usually in the Nimzo, Black would like to wait for White to play a3 before capturing on c3. You know, you want White to lose that tempo before you do it. That happens here, and Black goes ahead and takes the knight on c3, and pawn takes bishop. You can see Black has done some damage to White's queenside pawns, but he has given up the bishop pair, and these pawns aren't that weak yet. They can put some pressure on Black's center. So Petrosian has to solve the problem of his own light-squared bishop that is currently blocked in by e6. He does that by playing b6. The move queen to c7 today is the highest scoring move, but b6 allows the bishop at c8 to develop at b7 or even a6 and get out from behind that pawn at e6. cd5 is played by Reshevsky, ed5, and bishop to b2. So this particular structure in the Nimzo Indian, White usually would like to arrange to play the move e4 if they can, but there's also the possibility that Reshevsky could play c4, take on c5, and open up this long dark square diagonal for the bishop. And Petrosian doesn't want that to happen, so he goes ahead and plays c4. He wants to clog that up. So now this bishop at b2 for the moment is not very effective. It could emerge later, but it is not effective now. The price he pays, though, after bishop c2, is that he has reduced his own amount of tension he's placing on White's central structure. He goes ahead and plays bishop to g4, pinning the knight at f3, and Reshevsky just sidesteps that pin. He's not afraid of the doubled pawns after bishop takes knight, because he can just play king to h1, rook to g1, f4, and actually get a fairly decent attacking formation. So because of that, Black goes ahead and pops the knight into e4. And again, if White were to take, after de4, knight d2, it looks like he's going to win a pawn at c4, and he is. But after rook to c8, Black has an excellent position. These rooks are well placed. His pieces are much more dynamic, and he at least has compensation for a pawn, if not more. So Reshevsky plays knight to d2 to exchange off the knight on e4 and prepare the idea of f3 and e4, and advance in the center, as we talked about earlier, White likes to do in this structure. So knight takes knight, queen takes knight, and anticipating the moves f3 and e4, Petrosian plays bishop to h5 with the idea of going to g6 to challenge this very nice light-squared bishop of White's. So f3, continuing the plan, bishop g6, and e4. White has achieved his goal in this structure. He has effectively played the move e4. Black plays queen to d7 with the idea of bringing the two rooks to the center. Rook a to e1, backing up his e-pawn. de4, fe4. Now, these pawns are very strong, but they also could potentially become a target. And a strong move for black here actually would have been knight to e5. This has become more common these days. Even lower-rated players are aware of this idea because there's a pin on the d-pawn. The knight can jump into d3, and at the cost of a pawn, get rid of a white's light-squared bishop. That would be actually a fairly nice maneuver for black. But Petrosian continues rook f to e8, putting pressure on the e-pawn. Queen to f4, puts some pressure on f7, although it's sufficiently defended, obviously, right now. But he's defending e4 from the side. b5, advancing the queenside pawns from black. Bishop to d1, the bishop could go to f3, or to g4 to harass black's queen. Rook to e7, bishop g4 is where it goes. Queen to e8, increasing the pressure on the e-pawn, so Reshevsky advances it, which makes sense. And the truth is, Reshevsky has outplayed Petrosian up to this point. And he achieved his strategic goal, and he has some nice space in the center, and could, with a potential a4, a5 advance, get a very nice attack against Petrosian. a5 is played by black. Wants to play b4, break up these queenside pawns. Rook to e3. What Reshevsky would like to do is play d5. If he does it right now, then this knight could grab on e5. So he wants to double these rooks to overprotect d5, so then he could play d5 and advance those pawns further. Rook to d8, rook f to e1. Now, to the eye, white's position looks much better. He's got space, he's got the potential to advance the h-pawn up the board to attack. And it is at this moment that Petrosian plays the move that really changes chess history, because it became a permanent part of the middle game chess lexicon, and you really need to know this idea if you want to become a stronger player. He played a move, the move rook to e6, putting his rook directly under the threat of the bishop on g4. Now, when one player gives up a rook for another player's minor piece, a knight or a bishop, that's called sacrificing the exchange. So that's what he's doing here. He's sacrificing the exchange for completely positional reasons. There's no tactic here. He's not winning any material or forking anything. It's a pure positional exchange sacrifice. And that is the idea that Petrosian introduced into chess in this game with this incredible move. Now, for years, computers would never see this rook e6 move. Only recently, with the strongest of computers, is this now the first choice of modern engines. Really an amazing achievement by Petrosian. And Reshevsky, seeing that what Petrosian wants to do is play knight e7, knight d5 to get this knight on this beautiful d5 square. That's the idea, to control those central light squares. He resists taking the rook at first, and he plays the move a4. If bishop takes a e6, f e6, rook g3, knight to e7, rook f1, the knight could go to d5. It could also go to f5. Maybe a computer could break through as white, but for a human it would be almost impossible. So Reshevsky plays a4, trying to put some pressure on Petrosian's queenside pawn structure to keep him busy. But Petrosian says, look, I'm moving my knight to d5 no matter what you do. You can let me keep the rook if you want, but knight e7, I'm coming into this square. Reshevsky, recognizing that, said, well, I might as well take the material. I got to get something out of this, right? So he goes ahead and does take the rook. f e6, now queen to f1. Reshevsky's aiming at the c4 pawn, so when this pawn moves, which eventually it will need to do because of this a4 pressure, he can grab on c4. Petrosian just continues, and now this beautiful knight on d5, it's as strong as any rook in white's position. Rook to f3, now bishop to d3, attacking the queen on f1, and this is a serious threat. If that queen goes to f2, so it just moves, then after b4, black is clearly better. These pawns on the queen side are unbelievably strong, and with this knight on d5, white would be in serious trouble after that move. So Reshevsky sacrifices the exchange back. This isn't a classical positional exchange sacrifice. This is a, I have to do this to survive exchange sacrifice. So he gives up the rook for the bishop, and he does get a pawn in addition. Now, b4 was played by Petrosian. c4 would be a mistake. After knight to b6, this is a permanent protected passed pawn, and there's some pressure on white's center. So instead, pawn takes pawn. Petrosian could have taken with the knight, but taking with the pawn was fine. The pawn advances. Rook to a8 to stop the advancing pawn. Rook to a1 to back it up. Queen to c6 to help control the pawn's advance a bit, but also The queen aims at g2, so a move like knight to f4 could hit the queen and the g2 square, just cause some tactical problems for white. So he wants to avoid that. So Reshevsky plays bishop to c1, so the knight cannot jump into f4. The bishop controls that square. Queen to c7, attacking the a-pawn twice. The a-pawn moves. Now queen to b6, attacking it twice again. Bishop to d2. Now b3. Basically, at this point, Petrosian just wants to distract the queen so he can grab that pawn at a6. The queen moves to c4. h6 is played by black to give his king just a place to hide and not get in trouble on the back rank. h3, same thing. And then b2, of course, that attacks the rook at a1, and it's aiming towards the queening square. Rook to b1. And here, queen takes a6 was fine from Petrosian, but he did not play that. He played the king to h8, and then bishop to e1. And when these two pawns fall, which they will do inevitably, because both sides will simply have to take them, white's extra pawn at d4 is going nowhere, and his knight is much stronger than the bishop. So in this position, they actually agreed to a draw. Petrosian had a much better minor piece. Reshevsky had the extra pawn, but in this instance, I think if anyone had a justification to keep playing on, it was probably Petrosian. But they did agree to a draw in this position. I hope you enjoyed this historic and important game introducing the positional exchange sacrifice. See you again soon at Chess Talk. Goodbye.